Welcome to week 2 of our journey through Proverbs. Proverbs is a fascinating book, and I'll get into that in a minute. But before we do, I just want to introduce you to Smudge. The reason I've had to start this again is she keeps trying to actually be in the camera. Now that I'm actually trying to film her, she doesn't want to be there. Okay, Proverbs. Well, Proverbs is one of 3 books in the Bible that are described as wisdom books. They are written, they come after the histories, and they come before the books of the prophets. They are designed to help us in our walk as we walk closer to God, in our understanding of how we deal with each other, in our understanding of the world. They touch on such things as how to approach people, how to deal with people. They approach things like how to deal with suffering, how to understand what's going on. And Proverbs is just one of the 3. The other 2 being Ecclesiastes, and the third one being Job. They're both, again, absolutely fascinating studies in themselves, but they actually are a story arc. Proverbs is the youngster. Proverbs is for us starting out. Ecclesiastes is that mature part in us when we've actually got to the end of life and there's a little bit of cynicism built in. Job is the old man. Job is the end, where we look long and hard at what it really means to be one of God's followers and what he's done for us, and where we fit into the universe. And all 3, as I said, they're worthy of study. They're worthy of time sometimes that we just don't have. The quickest one, though, to get into is always Proverbs, and it's the starting point, and it's there for us young in the faith and young in life. Proverbs starts off as a story, and it's the story about a young man trying to find wisdom, trying to get out there into the world, and it's almost like someone saying to him, look, lad, be careful out there. Because there are 2 characters that are involved at the beginning of the book of Proverbs. There's the lady that's trying to call him into temptation. It's the one that's screaming from the rooftops, the one that's tempting, the temptations of the world. More importantly, though, is the young lady called Wisdom. And she is the one who tries to teach him wisdom and encourage him to walk in the ways of God and the ways of faith. It is Lady Wisdom that we pursue. In this day and age, where people sort of talk about Christianity as being patriarchal, as being very focused on men, what that shows is, again, people haven't actually spent time in the scriptures and spent time understanding things. It's the women at times that lead the way. I mean, for example, if you're looking at Lydia or Priscilla in the New Testament, as the church went out there, very, very exciting. When you look at the ministries of Martha and Mary in the New Testament, in the Gospels, again, amazing ladies. And in fact, even in the Old Testament, there are stories of women who actually, when their men completely fail and muck up, they're the ones that stand instead, or sometimes even lead the way. Of course, the classic one that people go straight to in the Old Testament would be Deborah the prophet, the judge in Israel. So what's this got to do with Proverbs? Well, Proverbs is all about how we live our day-to-day. And if we're going to apply it, we need to get into it. There are some Proverbs in there that can be quite challenging. And if they don't make sense, we need to sort of take 2 steps back and think about it and feel through it, look at the context. Remember that God is good, and remember that it is God that we want to love. When they talk about the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, that is true, because by pursuing that relationship and wanting a closer relationship, that fear of missing out, that fear of not being in a relationship with God, that's what they mean by the fear of the Lord. You want to be there, you want to please him. It's like when you're first in love with someone, it's not all about me, it's all about what you can do for someone else. It's the person that you fall in love with. It's your children, when you actually want to be there for them. It's for the youngsters or the people in need in the community that you want to help. It's that sort of, I want to be there, not for my sake, but for their sake. And the fear of the Lord is me saying, I want to be close to God. I want to live in his presence, and I want to live with him all my life, and to think on him and think on his word and walk ever closer. As it says in Psalm 119, his word is a lamp unto our feet, and that's what it has to be looked at, a light unto our path. And you can't say clearer than in Proverbs exactly what that means. Proverbs is a lamp to our way and a light to our path. So it begins with the story of the ladies, and then it goes into a whole series of aphorisms. You know, some of them are quite funny. Some of them you can sort of dig out and sort of point the finger at and go, well, that's a bit sort of right or wrong. But there are some real truths in it. There was one that we used to always laugh at as young lads before I got married that I wouldn't dare say it now. No, I wouldn't. There's no reference at all to Angie, whom I love dearly. One of the Proverbs says, living in a house with a nagging wife is like living with a dripping tap. It's an annoyance and it just keeps going and going and going. Now, that can be applied to men as well. You know, a wife living with a nagging husband that just goes on, has his own ways of things. It's often very selfish. It's often very driven with the wrong motive. And the dripping tap is an answer. The way you deal with a dripping tap is you get out there and you sort it. A constant dripping is something you can stop. But if you just let it go, it will irritate you to the point where you will lose your temper. So that's an example of taking one step back, and instead of being laughing and joking about the whole thing, is actually thinking it through. What does this actually mean if I try and apply it in my life? In terms of structure, Proverbs is an interesting book in the sense that it has 31 chapters. And that means that it's actually very, very useful if you're stuck about what to study, or if you want to build into a pattern into your life of constant study, constant spending time in the Word. You can essentially say every day of the month will be a day when I go into Proverbs. On day 1, it will be Proverbs chapter 1. On day 28, it'll be Proverbs 28. Okay, at the end of it, you're going to miss out maybe 30 and 31 a couple of times. Well, 31 in particular. No reason why on the 30th you don't read both 30 and 31. And one of the most famous people who used to quite honestly and openly talk about doing that was Billy Graham. Billy Graham, all his years as a Christian in his walk, he would read a chapter of Proverbs every day. And it's a way to learn, it's a way to study, it's a way to understand. It's a way to guard your mind and your heart against the things that could lead you astray, against the things that could lead you into trouble, the things that could cause you to stumble. So I would recommend, if you've got the time to do that, to try and do that. Now, having said that, I'm not very good at that. I follow various other study plans. If you're using the Bible app, the YouVersion Bible app, it's absolutely brilliant. It's got studies in there that you can go on a daily basis. It can set daily reminders for you. You don't have to set the reminders if you don't want. And you can just leave them and dip in and dip out if you want, or you can actually build in a routine, a habit of dipping into the Word every day. And Proverbs is actually a good tool to actually start that habit if you've not done it before. When you get into Proverbs itself, you'll further find that there's actually broken into a number of Proverbs. There's Proverbs about somebody called Asaph that's prepared them, but mainly the bulk of them are from Solomon. And it's sometimes referred to as the Book of the Wisdom of Solomon. And Solomon has gone down in history as the most wise king. The story that they actually talk about is the two prostitutes, and they both have children. And in the night, one rolls over and kills their baby. So she slips into her friend's room or colleague's room and steals her baby. And Solomon is asked to judge on this. I mean, it's quite a gruesome story because both women are absolutely determined that the baby was theirs. So he says, right, well, fair enough. I'll get a sword and I'll cut it in half and you can both have half each. And the real mother, the one that was desperate, that had the love of a mother to see her child grow, and she said, no, don't do that. She could have it instead. And by that, Solomon was able to actually work out which of the two women was actually the real mother of that baby. That's one of the particular stories that's told. More importantly, you actually read about the fact that the kings in the area used to come to Solomon and they would pay tribute to Solomon to hear his wisdom. And the most famous of that, of course, is the Queen of Sheba, who travels a distance, bringing lots of wealth and gifts to Solomon. The sad thing about Solomon's life is, as he gets older, he falls away from it. He is led astray. He's led astray by his wives and concubines. He is reputed to have had 700 wives and 300 concubines. How that is possible, I have no idea. And on this side of heaven, I have no answer to that. What I would say is, though, that the answers to that probably rest in the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Proverbs, however, is definitely written by someone who's young and fresh and desperate to try and find the right path and the way of wisdom. So, without further ado, what I would say to you is get into Proverbs if you haven't done. Read it. If you're not sure how to approach it, dip in on a day-to-day basis. If not, read it from cover to cover. You might find that quite difficult because, as I said, there are a whole series of aphorisms that maybe require you to stop and think about what's actually being said. I mean, what does it mean by spare the rod and spoil the child? Well, the simple answer there is if the rod is the rule by which we're supposed to live, if you don't set the example, if you don't teach them discipline, if you don't encourage them in the ways of wisdom, we are going to end up with a child that is spoilt and unruly. It's not saying that because the child is unruly that we've spared the rod, but it doesn't mean what some people would actually interpret it as being to take the stick to them. Doesn't mean that at all. A good example, again, of an aphorism that you need to dig into. So, having talked about the application of Proverbs, where does that leave us? Number one, what is God trying to tell us through the book of Proverbs? He's trying to tell us an awful lot, particularly in that first section where he's talking about the pursuit of wisdom. Those words are meaningful. They go right to the marrow of matters before us, and they're worthy of study. What does it tell us about people? Certainly go away and discuss it and what your thoughts are on that to see if you agree with me. My feeling is it really does tell us that we have to learn wisdom. We have to understand wisdom. It's an example I've used before and certainly discussed amongst yourselves, but I see wisdom as being what you do with the tools that you're given. So you can be as intelligent as anything. You can have degrees coming out of your ears, but you might have absolutely no wisdom whatsoever. Yet you'll have people who have had not had the opportunities of study, not had the opportunities of learning, not had the opportunities to develop skills with their hands. And yet they have a mind that applies those things in a sensible, logical, profitable way. And they're wise. That is wisdom. Wisdom is not the tools that you have. Wisdom is what you do with the tools that you are given. So just to go back to those 4 questions. In your groups, first of all, ask yourself, what does this tell us? What does the book of Proverbs tell us about God? Why did he give it to us? The second question is, what does this tell us about people? Our need for that sort of book? The third question is, how am I going to apply this to my life? It's enough to have opinions, but what are you actually going to do about it? Are you going to go away and read it and study it and consider it? Or are you just going to put it back on the shelf? And the fourth question is, who are you going to talk to about it? Yes, we've got our small groups, but there are other people within the groups, outside your groups, you're going to talk about with. It's a great opener. It's a great discussion point. People who are actually trying to find their way as young Christians, trying to find their way in the faith. Sometimes even when they've actually got no understanding of Christianity at all. If you've spent time in Proverbs and you understand them, you can maybe share with them and help them in their walk. Just remember, our main calling is to include people in our lives as Ramsey Elim. It's to invite people to take part in those lives, to build groups, to build connections, and to bless people, to be there for them when they most need it. Thank you very much. I hope you found this interesting. And if you've got any questions, please reach out to the leadership. Reach out in groups. If you want to join a group, please contact us and we can see where we can fit you in. The most important thing is that we all walk closer to God day by day. So with that, go with God, and I pray that through your week that you will find yourself closer to God than you were at the beginning of the week. Thank you.